Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit411, where we dive into resources and strategies that help nonprofits not just survive, but truly thrive. I'm Sarah Barton, your host and fundraising advocate. Each episode, we bring you inspiring conversations with experts in fundraising, sustainability, and best practices to equip you with the tools and confidence you need to make a real impact. Nonprofit leaders know that funding is key to making a lasting impact. But finding the right approach can be challenging. At Nonprofit411, we understand that grants are just one piece of the puzzle, but an important skill for every nonprofit to master. That's why we created the Grant Writing Proposal Guide, to help you turn your mission into actionable plans that attract funding. Let us support you in taking your fundraising to the next level. Download the guide at nonprofit411.org today, and let's build a stronger future together. Hi there and welcome. I'm thrilled you're here with us today. Each week we have conversations with nonprofit experts who offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help nonprofits build sustainable funding and stronger communities. Whether you're here to learn, to be inspired, or simply to recharge, I'm glad you've joined us. So let's jump in. I'm your host, Sarah Barton, and today I am joined by Joseph Scarano with Araize, and he currently serves as the CEO. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. It's Araize. I know a lot of people, no problem. A lot of people have difficulty pronouncing the name. We may actually made up the name. So this will be perfect for your audience. It's Araize, like raising funds, and you work hard, you deserve a raise.
I love that. I even wrote it down, and short-term memory.
Yeah, that's okay. No, not a problem. You got my last name right. So that's a good one.
Yeah, I grew up in Pennsylvania, so like having, is it Italian?
It is Italian, yes.
Yeah, so having Italian names all around me was pretty common. So, well, welcome. I like to start with a fun question, just to learn a little bit more about you. And my question always is, what is your favorite hobby?
Well, cooking. Cooking is, I love to cook. I love to feed people. So I guess handed down from my Italian grandmothers. So I really enjoy, cooking and having people enjoy what I cook. So I would say that would be my favorite hobby.
I love that. On the weekends, you will always find me in the kitchen at some point because I love to prepare food. I just love the process of preparing food. And I am the entertainer in our family. My mom says I'm the matriarch, even though she's older than me. She's like, you're the matriarch in the family. It's because I love to have people come into my house. And I can imagine being, the true matriarch at some point in my life.
Yeah. Well, you kind of reminded me of a song back in the 80s. I don't know if you know this one, but there was a pop song called You'll Always Find Me in the Kitchen at Parties.
Yeah. Yep. That's true. That's where you'll find me. So that's so fun. Well, thank you for sharing that. So can you tell our guests a little bit about yourself and your role and what you currently work at?
Sure. I started my professional career back in the early 80s. I'm a CPA. I was licensed in the state of New York, and the firm that I worked for, the majority of our clients were nonprofits. So being in the 80s, that was the introduction of the PC, the IBM PC and the Mac. And my partner in the firm had this brilliant idea of we should write accounting software for nonprofits. So we started the business in the mid 80s, and it was a separate business from the accounting firm. And so we grew into where we are now. So software became my ticket out of public accounting. I left the accounting industry in 1991 and never looked back. So Araize has been around, started in New York. We're now in North Carolina, but we've been around for 40 years and serving over 1,500 nonprofit and municipal government agencies around the world.
Yeah, so I was really interested in having you on because I think the fiscal management side of nonprofits is something that we don't talk a lot about, in the sector, but it's such a vital piece in fundraising. I deal with fundraising, and you can't create a strategy without understanding the fiscal situation, right? And so I just am so excited to have this conversation and just to hear, what are some of the things that you recommend every nonprofit know
Well, all the nonprofits, regardless of their mission, whether it's social service, community services, economic development, religious, arts, whenever, whatever they form the nonprofit and create their mission, the most important thing is identifying funding streams, because you can't fulfill your mission without proper resources. And those are financial resources. Even if you're totally volunteer run, you need financial resources. So, the number one thing that I emphasize, when I am consulting with nonprofits is build out your mission. What is your mission statement? And the second thing is, how are you going to fund that mission? So you have to identify multiple funding streams. It can't be 100% reliant on donations or fundraising events. There has to be something that diversifies funding to enable you to properly execute your mission and provide the services that the nonprofit has been created for. So, again, from us, fiscal management is one of the key things to proper sustainability for any nonprofit organization.
Yeah. I have begun speaking about nonprofit development, like business development, in many ways. You have started a type of business, a nonprofit is just a type of business. And I don't think that we often talk about it in those terms, but can you help our listeners understand the difference between a nonprofit business and a for-profit business? Because it's true, in both business and nonprofits, we talk about diversification of funding streams, but the difference I know is in the budgeting, correct?
Yes, but it's also the responsibility of the nonprofit when revenue is received. I always like to draw the analogy of, if you go to the local bakery and buy a loaf of bread, whatever that loaf of bread costs now, the only thing you're really concerned with is the bread fresh and does it taste really good? What the bakery does with the funds that they receive from selling bread, they reinvest in the business. They can do whatever they want with it. Whereas for a nonprofit, the revenue that they receive typically has strings attached. The nonprofit really can't do what they want with money that they receive. Typically, a donor will designate their funds for a specific purpose or expect the nonprofit to invest their funds in their mission, and also in overhead. And a nonprofit will not be able to operate without proper overhead. So there's always a portion of revenue that has to be allocated towards the management of the nonprofit. And so again, the difference is, when funds are received from a nonprofit, it's their responsibility to demonstrate to their various funding sources that the funds were used for their designated purpose. And that's why they have what they call restricted funds and unrestricted funds. So that really is the key difference.
Yeah. And I think that understanding that difference is so important, especially when we look at our funding streams. Having a nice plan for the unrestricted funds is really important, because like you said, that's all of the operating costs. So what are some of the restrictions, or how does an organization go about developing a strong unrestricted fundraising plan?
Well, number one is communication. They have to communicate to their communities, the work that they're doing and their need in order to fulfill that mission, to perform the work that they want to execute in their community. So communication, of course, building a strong board. A board of directors will help them with their outreach, with their connections. And raising funds, they have to understand, they have to communicate to, whether it's donations, they're trying to solicit donations or solicit grant funding, or possibly program service revenue, because there's all different types of revenue that a nonprofit could generate. But the three main would be fundraising, grant revenue, and program services. So with each of those three funding streams, the nonprofit has to develop a strategy on what they're going to focus on that's going to fund the nonprofit. If they don't think that they are eligible for grants, then they have to focus on the other two, whether it's fundraising events or charitable contributions coming in. And so, the nonprofit, they really have to have a very diversified plan, and they need to execute that plan by outreach to the community, whether it's, through social media now, because that's a great way that they can outreach, that goes beyond just their geographic community. It could be worldwide outreach if they execute and use social media properly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that's true. And I think that we sometimes underestimate the generosity of our donors, because donors really do understand that you need unrestricted funds, and they'll invest in you, right?
Yes.
And I like to use that terminology, invest,
Yeah. And it's really important that, the nonprofit has systems in place to acknowledge every single donation they receive, whether it's $1 or $1,000. If you donate to an organization and you receive no feedback, no thank you, don't know if your donation went into a black hole. An acknowledgement of that donation, and to explain how that donation is going to benefit the community at large that the nonprofit is serving, goes a long way in building trust and building proper stewardship of those funds. So, the nonprofit, when they get started, they really need to, as I said, develop a funding stream plan, and then implement systems that enable them to properly manage their funds that are coming in, and on the other side of it, the funds going out, their expenses.
Yeah. 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 Thank you so much. I think that this is great information. So what are some common challenges that you see when you're serving nonprofits? What do you consistently see are some of the barriers or challenges?
The biggest issue that I see, it's not 100% of the time, but lots of nonprofits, God bless them for what they're doing, they totally underestimate the importance of fiscal management. They will find a volunteer to handle their books, so to speak. And that person doesn't understand basic bookkeeping, doesn't understand accounting, doesn't know, how to do a bank reconciliation, can't read a financial statement. And then they wonder why they're struggling fiscally, because they don't have a good handle on their finances. So, they might use a off-the-shelf accounting system that they perceive as providing proper fiscal management. But if they have someone that's managing that system, recording the income and expenses, but not recording it properly, they're going to get inaccurate financial statements. So they really can't rely on those financial statements to see how they're doing, from month to month, building budgets and properly allocating expenses to the appropriate areas. So, it's really important that, as they plan on getting the nonprofit started, that they find a volunteer if they are not hiring someone, but find someone that understands basic accounting. So that person, could record all of their cash in and cash out in, proper nonprofit reporting, so they can pull out financial statements to see how much money came in, where that money was designated for, how much money has gone out, and where that money is being spent. And so that way they get a good idea of whether or not for specific programs that they're operating, their mission-based programs, are they bringing in enough resources to cover the expenses so they could continue running those programs?
Oh, yeah. I think that's very important for nonprofits to hear and to understand. And I think so often we do rely on volunteers, and kind of whoever's willing to volunteer to be the treasurer for a nonprofit. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it's like any other business. They're nonprofit, but it's still a business. So, you wouldn't take your dog or pet to the local vet and have a volunteer, take care of your dog or pet, or go to the doctors. You want someone who's qualified, that could diagnose an issue. So it really is the nonprofit is doing themselves a disservice if they don't have someone in place that understands accounting, and specifically understands nonprofit accounting, because, as I said, it's a completely different reporting structure than a for-profit business.
Yeah. So Is this an area then you typically advise organizations to outsource?
Yes, if they don't have an in-house person that is qualified to do the job, then I would advise that they outsource it.
Okay.
Outsource it to an accounting firm or a bookkeeping service firm, and ideally an accounting or bookkeeping service firm that specializes in nonprofit accounting.
Is it very expensive?
Not really. I mean, again, it really all depends on the scope of the job. I mean, it if it's a relatively small nonprofit with, maybe 100 transactions a month, it shouldn't be more than 4 or 5 hours of accounting work to prepare financial statements, based on those 100 transactions. But, if the nonprofit is a little bit more complex with payroll, with grant reporting, then the job, and the responsibilities of the outside accounting firm, a little bit more intensive, or, a little bit more involved.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I
yes.
think a lot of people may hesitate, but I think that, it's just an investment in this business and
Yeah.
provides such great outcome. You mentioned something that I really want to touch on. You said you need a firm that understands the reporting requirements for a nonprofit. Can you tell us a little bit about those reporting requirements?
Sure. So as a nonprofit, you have to track three different pieces of information. You have to track revenue and expenses by what we like to refer to as who, what, and why. Who is pretty simple, who donated to you or who did you pay the expense to? The what is, well, if it's a donation, it's fundraising revenue. If it's an expense, it's office supplies or utilities or rent or payroll. The why is the part of the equation that makes nonprofit accounting unique. The why is this an expense a mission-based program expense? Is it a management in general administrative expense, or is it a fundraising expense? So proper nonprofit reporting requires that you break out all of your expenses by those three main, what are referred to as functional expense categories: mission-based program, and then support services, which includes management in general or administration and fundraising. So any nonprofit who has revenue over $250,000 a year has to file an annual 990, and there's a report on the 990 for your functional expense report. So all of your expenses need to be broken down by those three categories.
Yeah, I think that's really good for all of our nonprofits to know, because I think that a lot of times that's the area they're least familiar with when they start the nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, even though they're not taxable because they are a nonprofit, the IRS requires that they file an annual report. That report is a 990. There are different versions of the 990 depending on the size of the nonprofit. So real small nonprofits with a revenue less than $50,000, that's an e-file online. You go to IRS.gov and file your 990 electronically online. There's very little information on that post. They call it a postcard because it used to be a mailed-in postcard. And then there's the 990 EZ for revenue between 50 and 250,000. That has a lot more information than the postcard. But then the final 990, if your revenue is over $250,000, that's where your functional expense report comes in. You have to that's where you have to complete that form. You also have your balance sheet. There's a lot of supplemental schedules on the 990 regarding your mission, how much resources were dedicated to the mission, your sources of revenue, information about your board and your donors.
Yeah. So good to know. Good to know. Now, so tell me about the best nonprofit that you work for. They have all their ducks in a row. Do you have one of those?
Well, I mean, we have a lot. As I said, we have about 1,500 worldwide. It's kind of hard to pick out what I would think is the best. But off the top of my head, there's an organization in Hendersonville, North Carolina called Safe Light Family. They've been a user of our fast fund system over 20 years. They have all three pieces of our applications, our full accounting suite, our fundraising suite for donor management, and payroll. Unfortunately, they were just recently, hit by Hurricane Helene. So they were closed down for a week or so. And so they went through a difficult time, but fortunately they're back up and running. But I've been working with the fiscal director and development director, as I said, for over 20 years. It's a mother-daughter team. The mother was work, and then the daughter took over for the mother. And they provide services for families, women who might be undergoing spousal abuse, or, they need a shelter. And so they provide services to hundreds of families in the Western North Carolina area. And, many times we hear from them how easy their audits are, with our system, how their fundraising database integrates automatically to accounting. So it's really easy to do in their reconciliations. But the most important thing is, why I picked them off the top of my head is, the length of time we've been working with them and getting to know them personally, the executive director, the development director, the fiscal director, and knowing the hard work that they do to serve their community. And it's really gratifying for us knowing that the software we're providing to SafeLight is helping them, fulfill their mission and be more sustainable, and helping them just continue to operate.
Mm-hmm. Do they have an excellent way? I love organizations that have a nice way of being transparent to their donors, like how their donations are used. Do they do that well?
Yeah, they, through their fundraising system from Araize, they're able to automatically acknowledge their donors, for gifts that they received when they have fundraising events. They track, the revenue coming in from the events. And at the end of the year, they send out year-end donor statements, with a summary of what the organization accomplished during the year and how gratifying, they are, and thankful to their donors, for helping them, with their donations during the year.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's so important for us to remember to close that feedback loop and really give our donors that information about the change that they're making in the world, because the donors are, I feel like the nonprofits are the conduit, but the donors are the ones who really make that happen.
Yeah, they do. And there's a lot of competition for donations, as all nonprofits know. So you need to do something that help you stand out. Whether it's a thank you note, you can even get a letter of appreciation, even if you didn't donate. We appreciate your past donations, and this is what we've been able to accomplish, through your help. So any kind of acknowledgement, to the donors is really helpful.
Yeah, because they really do help make it all possible. So what advice would you what is the number one piece of advice that you give leaders, or you give nonprofit leaders, when it comes to their fiscal management?
Well, number one, they need to make sure that they have the proper tools. If whether it's an inside accountant, a bookkeeper, accountant, fiscal director, or if they're outsourcing their accounting, they want to make sure that the accountants doing the job are provided and use proper tools for nonprofit reporting. Because of the major differences in how nonprofits have to present their financial statements, an off-the-shelf accounting package typically doesn't provide them with proper segregation of their functional expenses, of their unrestricted and restricted funds, proper statement of financial positions or balance sheet, and proper statement of activities. So if you're not using a nonprofit accounting application, then typically you have to export all your data into Excel to try to formulate your financial statements, which in and of itself could create internal control deficiencies if your statements don't agree with what's in your accounting. So having the proper tools in place is really important, and having an integrated system where the fundraising and payroll systems and accounting all talk to each other. So that way, you don't generate a report from your fundraising system that says we raised $20,000 in donations this month, and the accounting system says, well, we only booked 15,000. Where is that 5,000 discrepancy? And so they go crazy trying to figure out, why does fundraising say 20 and why does accounting say 15? And so having a single system that tracks both, without exporting and importing and trying to reconcile makes their jobs a lot easier. And it just eliminates the need to try to figure out why there are differences in our systems. Same thing with payroll. You want to make sure that in payroll, the difference in nonprofit payroll and accounting and for-profit payroll is typically nonprofits have to allocate individual salaries. So if you have multiple programs or multiple grants and funding sources, you might have an employee that during their payroll cycle, let's say a semi-monthly payroll cycle, that they work part-time in the homeless shelter. The other part-time, they work in food pantry. Sometimes they're in the counseling center. And those three programs might be funded by three different grants. So a single salary or paycheck is not just posted to salaries, it's posted to salaries to three different line item expenses for those three different programs and or the funding sources. So, having a system that allows the nonprofit to do that just makes it a lot easier when it comes to budgeting, when it comes to financial reporting, grant management, and grant reporting.
Yes. You're singing my language right now. So I have been director of human resources for a very large organization, and I have done grant management for years. And that not having systems that communicate with one another creates extra steps. And so I love that you recommend that they all be integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not integrated, organizations have to schedule in and plan that time to help create that consistency across all the books, because especially with grant management, which has been a huge focus for my career, it's so simple for a item that should be reimbursed from the grant to not be linked with the grant, right? Because we've maybe purchased it on our credit card, but it didn't go back with the correct grant. And so I know that there are a lot of mistakes in that area. So I love that you recommend that.
Yeah, and typically, if they are receiving grants, they are subject to an audit. And so having a clean audit trail from their accounting system to their financial statements to their grant reports, if everything ties together, it just makes the grant reporting and the audit much easier. Unfortunately, during my time as an auditor, the biggest challenge that we had was financial statements that did not tie into the accounting system. There was discrepancies, and then you have to go crazy trying to figure out those discrepancies.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can be hours and hours, sometimes
wasted time. Yes.
Yeah. And yes, I've lived that life multiple times. So thank you so much. So can you tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you and learn more about Araize?
Sure. Again, it's Araize, Araize. So they can go to araize.com. That lists all of our fast fund modules, the accounting, the fundraising, and payroll. They could sign up for a meeting or a demo or download a trial version. They can send an email directly to me if they're interested. That's joe@araize.com, ARAIZE.com.
Awesome. And do you have any resources available that just let nonprofits know what they need to have?
Oh, yes. Besides Araize specializing in nonprofit software, we also have a small branch within our company or a different, department that provides education resources. We have a nonprofit financial management course. We have a YouTube channel that has a series of videos that explains the differences of between nonprofit and for-profit accounting, how to track restricted and unrestricted donations, how to track allocation of expenses. So if you go to YouTube and just search Araize, it'll pop up with our YouTube channel with the educational resources that we provide to help people understand, proper nonprofit accounting.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, because it is such a needed educational area for all nonprofits. So I appreciate that. So thank you for
Sure.
joining us. Is there any last piece of advice or last tips or tricks or whatever you'd like to give our listeners before we sign off?
Well, Sarah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the time you afforded me, and hopefully, your listeners will heed our advice when it comes to proper fiscal management. And I mean, my last piece of advice is continue doing the work that you're doing to serve your communities, regardless of what your mission is. And we really value what you add to all of our communities, and we're happy to be able to help some of you out there with proper fiscal management.
Thank you. I echo that. That's perfect. Yes, keep doing what you're doing. So,
Mhm.
to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us this week. And Joe, thank you so much. We look forward to being able to have more conversations again in the future.
Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Nonprofit 411. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. Remember, building a healthy nonprofit requires a holistic approach. There are many resources available to support your staff, and we're dedicated to helping your organization access what it needs to thrive. One key to creating a thriving organization is a diverse fundraising strategy. While grants are an important part of that strategy, they're just one piece of the overall puzzle. If you're looking to strengthen your grant writing skills as part of this bigger picture, I've got a resource to help you get started. Download my free grant writing guide packed with practical tips and best practices to help you craft proposals that align with your overall fundraising goals. You'll find the link in the show notes. And as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your fellow changemakers. Let's work together to build a vibrant nonprofit community. Until next time, keep pushing forward and making a difference.